Good day to you, General. I have to admit, I was surprised when I heard you were back on Ortis. With all the job that still needs to be done, everyone believed that you were still with your forces on New Sajar. I could say the same about you, Prime Minister, what with you being now in charge of the entire Commonwealth. We both have important things to do, and yet we sit here chatting away. To be honest, I hoped to get a hold of Tessar as well, but he's as elusive as ever, and that AI secretary of his isn't too helpful when it comes to booking an appointment. The Chancellor is indisposed as of late. I'm sure you understand, General, that while you are at peak performance, Mr. Tessar is slowly starting to feel his age, and it's sometimes necessary for him to take a day or two off. Still, if you want to relay a message, you can always tell me, and I assure you the Chancellor will hear it. If you say so. So, let me be blunt, Prime Minister. I came here with a question, and a very simple one at that. Why the hell aren't you using that perfect opportunity that showed up at our northern border? I'm not sure I follow, General. And I'm sure you do, Prime Minister. I'm talking about Yadra. They have been defeated by the Billy ones some time ago, and if those refugees on Redamon are to be believed, their armed forces were completely wiped out. Their fleet is gone, their armies are shattered, their king is in exile, and their capital has fallen to the mind, scattering Yadran leadership all across their colonies. If that's not a prime opportunity for us to act, then I don't know what is. I don't like what you're suggesting, General Branitsky. I'm not suggesting anything. The Kingdom of Yadra has been a thorn in our side for years now. They closed their borders to our researchers and traders, they denounced our nation and our entire civilization, and they even encroached on our territory, laying claim to worlds in our sphere of influence. And now, with their defeat, we have a chance to push back. General, are you suggesting that we should act like vultures, picking at our bloodied neighbors simply because they're weak? No, I'm saying that, if Innovation Party adheres to the laws of logic as much as it claims to, we should eliminate this weak nation from the galaxy before its inevitable downfall will benefit someone else. The kingdom is beaten, it has proven too weak to protect its lands and its people, and with the neighbors it has, it will fall either to the Billiwan mind, Yanari slavers, or us. I'm sure you see that the last option is the best alternative, both for us and for Yadrans themselves. Interesting. So you say that in order to protect the Yadrans we have to declare war on them. Pardon me, but I do not see that logic you were talking about. If you're truly that eager to help the Yadrans, then perhaps you should consider actually supporting them, instead of adding even more slaughter. And do what exactly? Attack the mind now when it is strong? Send resources to the kingdom itself despite its absolute disdain towards us? No, Prime Minister, what we need is quick, decisive action. It will not be pretty, I'm aware of that, but given other alternatives, it's something that we simply must do, for both Yadrans and the entire Commonwealth. I see. My answer is no, General, and I'm sure Chancellor will agree with me on that one. We are not vultures nor war profiteers. But it is not up to you, is it? The people are the ones who will decide, and you know just as well as I do that they are still riding high on our latest victory. Sure, there are those who lost their close ones on and above New Sajar, but they are such a minority that they may even be considered a statistical error. With the help of our propaganda division, I'm sure I can convince the rest of them to do the right thing. Hell, even Lynn is on board on this one. Seems that losing an arm and an ear and an entire flagship dimmed her optimistic disposition a little. Have you came here just to brag, General? No, I came here to find more allies, but since you're obviously unwilling to commit to my plan, I'll have to look somewhere else. Still, seemed like a decent thing to tell you eye to eye, but I think I'll take my leave now, Prime Minister. Lots of work to do. I wish you good day. To you as well, General. Have you heard it all? Aye, seems like Marek's new authority got to his head a little, exactly as planned. Still, I feel bad about this. The points he made, some of them are valid, but it still feels wrong. I'm well aware of that, but for Commonwealth to survive, drastic steps need to be taken, and with General Branitsky's assent, at the very least they will not be traced back to us. Salutations everyone, and welcome back to Second Chance. we returned to the Commonwealth in a slightly random moment because, unfortunately, we were plagued by some technical issues that caused me to lose first 15 minutes of the recording. Fortunately though, you haven't really missed much. What I did there was basically some housekeeping, checking up on our planet and our people to see how they fared after the war, and fortunately they were doing quite fine, slowly building up our power. A thing worth mentioning was the fact that now we have yet another federation around. This time it is one between Gir Compact, the Mantises, and a Hadi conglomerate, the tentacly capitalist thingies, and as soon as this federation formed, it immediately declared war, under Hadi leadership, against the Shizri Council, the avian xenophobic isolationists who live in the corner of the galaxy. So it seems that now all of our friendly neighbors and potential allies, except Shalani horses, are embroiled in wars. But while Alir and Sandrithans are just defending themselves, the war between Ahadi, Gir Federation and Shizri isolationists is just a pure land grab. As was said, it seems that Ahadi are not beneath using force of arms to expand their megacorporation. And finally, with official unification of our nation, the government has sent a huge exploration mission to the west, in hopes of charting the other side of our tiny galactic core. We'll have to see what comes out of this mission in the following months. There was also another bit of diplomacy happening in the background. As you may remember, there is a freshly formed stellar nation, the Alliance of New Beginning, that currently sits right in the middle of our Commonwealth. Fortunately for us, this nation of Plantoids is extremely friendly towards us, though mind you, it might be simply because we are far more advanced and powerful than them, since they only recently mastered interstellar spaceflight. Still, we established really good relations with them over the last few months, and we even gave them access to our databanks, so they could bridge the technological gap between us as quickly as possible. But it was obvious that their late arrival onto the galactic scene made them weak. They have no place to expand and are just basically surrounded by us. So in order to deal with that issue, Chancellor Tessa proposed a solution: an invitation into the Commonwealth. At first just as an ally, though Protectorate would be a better name, since it's rather improbable that the Alliance would ever help us in any conflict. But if our cooperation proves successful, and Queptilian people willing, the Alliance of New Beginning will simply become a part of our nation. Now, some will surely consider it just an annexation, but we're not going to push the Alliance there, and instead we'll just present this proposition as a sort of a trade deal. They will join us, and in return we'll give them access to the rest of the galaxy. If they refuse, fine, they can sit on their single planet. And because the Queptilium are explorers by nature, they have agreed. So, over the next decade or two, we will have a chance to work out the details of their induction, and that's another step towards more unified Commonwealth. And finally, few months later, the last of our explorers and diplomats sent reports from their 5-year mission to the west, and the information they brought us made us realize that this galaxy is far, far more crowded than we expected, and that compared to our relatively quiet corner, it is also extremely violent. So, let's take a look at their reports. The first one was surprisingly optimistic. Beyond the Yanari borders, our explorers found a race of one-eyed, snail-like mollusks, who called themselves Fifth-Gran Union. Though a bit strange in form, Fifth-Grans have actually proved to be surprisingly in line with our own ideals, as they too were mostly focused on exploring the galaxy and uncovering its secrets. So much in fact that their society operated like a single huge scientific foundation, with their leaders being researchers instead of politicians. Granted, that fanatical drive for progress made their society a bit lacking in terms of personal laws. For the Fifth-Gran Union, the state is just this single huge laboratory, and there is no time for democracy in there. If the director wants you to pack up and move to another planet, you obey. If he needs you to abandon your job and become a miner or an engineer, you obey. In the meritocratic world of Fifth-Gran Union, efficiency and progress are the key, and lives of everyone revolve around these ideals, for, at least according to their leaders, the benefit of all. On the upside though, they are interested in other cultures and races, which enabled us to easily get on their good side and establish relations. And that's particularly important here, because Fifth-Grans are the only race out there that can match us in terms of technological progress, which means we can actually exchange data with them. To the north of them, our explorers intercepted signals from fragmented remnants of an entity called Rexicodium Union, quite a lot of unions around here. This nation of Plantoids was apparently recovering from a recent lost war against some another unknown empire, but aside from that, the Rexicodium people were an odd bunch, both when it comes to the way they look and to the way they live. From what we've gathered, it seems that their society operates on a caste system that was established on their homeworld in the ancient times, and hasn't changed even even a bit since then. As such, the upper classes of the Union tend to be a bit lethargic and decadent, while the lower classes are just mindless drones, slaving away for their masters without even realizing that there may be other alternatives. Now, the discovery of spaceflight shook up their society a bit and sparked some interest in other races and cultures, but it's mostly manifested in the will to acquire exotic servants that Rexicodian elites could parade in front of their rivals. Still, as far as slavers go, these ones aren't that bad, certainly better than the Anari. Further north still, we encountered Grolferb Pious Covenant, and once again, like with Kithri and Utkavongo, we realized that there were two races out there that evolved on different worlds in different star systems, and yet still somehow looked the same. Unfortunately, while the Grolferb looked like Fedgrans, their way of life was drastically different, as they were a theocratic republic that, similar to Zrakan Union, believed in spreading their religion among the lesser races by any means possible, be it by peaceful conversion or fire and sword. So, our contact with them wasn't too long. We met them, they tried to convert us, we said that we're not interested, and that was it. What we managed to learn, though, was that this nation has also suffered from a defeat in recent times, this one against dreaded Dis Berserkers, and that's, as you might expect, not good for people of the Covenant. The Dis are eradicators, so any planet they conquered has been probably wiped clean of all life at this point, a fate that we would not wish even on the worst of our enemies. Then, further to the west, we encountered yet another religious race, the Cirulan. Like Grolferb, their union of domains was a democratic theocracy, but as soon as we established contact with them, it was obvious that Cirulan are just as fanatical in their beliefs as our Zrakan rivals. Fortunately, though, their religion was one of peace, and it guided the turtle-like Ceruleans along the path of non-violence, towards some higher unknown goal. According to our data, it seems that these aliens believe that all life is connected on some higher level, and they're trying to uncover that connection. And who knows, with everything that we've learned about psionics in recent decades, it might just be that they're right. Still, while Ceruleans weren't hostile, they weren't exactly friendly either, so for now their presence can safely be ignored. But some of our explorers wondered just how long their pacifistic religion will survive against all the chaos around them. Because further to the northwest, backed into the very corner of the galaxy, was yet another race of crusading fanatics, the Sacred Avul Ascendancy. Like Rexicodians before them, they too were recovering after a lost war against some hostile aliens, in which they have apparently lost their homeworld and several other systems. Sadly though, they were not really willing to talk to us, since, like the Zrakan, they were bent on spreading their religion by the force of arms, with their stratified society being highly militarized in order to enforce the will of the Holy Tribunal that ruled their nation. The only useful thing that we learned from them was that, like Rexicodians, they were defeated by some unknown enemy who never even tried to establish contact with them, and instead just devastated their fleets and bombarded their planets until they were completely glassed from pole to pole. So, an interesting information, one that we will surely have to keep in mind in the future. Further to the south, we met Concordat of Fenhalor, inhabited by Beldros, yet another republic led by religious officials. This time though, they were more like the turtles to the northeast, and they weren't willing to commit genocide to spread the word of their god. Interestingly though, it seems that their beliefs are surprisingly similar to the ones our Shalani allies follow, because Beldros' religion was one that fiercely promoted individual laws and social equality. So in a way this is an anomaly in itself, because of all the entities worshipped across the galaxy, the god of Fenhalor is a democrat. We can only hope that it won't enforce that equality with the power of nuclear-powered spaceships. And, keeping with the theme of religious nations, the one that bordered the Concordat was Zaska's empire, yet another entity bent on spreading the word of their god by the force of arms, regardless if intended recipients were willing or not. There was, however, a single difference. While all those evangelizing zealots we encountered so far were spreading their beliefs, the Zaskas preached the actual word of their god, because, as it turned out, their god was not some entity from old tale, but an actual living, breathing being that sat on the throne in their capital. And this was something that completely shook our explorers. The Zaskas believed that their leader was a god and venerated them as God Emperor, and said God Emperor had an absolute power over their domain, being able to command their subjects to do their will no matter how weird or even suicidal it might be. So, as you might expect, they were not keen on meeting us and very quickly closed all diplomatic channels. So, another nation to add to the list of potentially hostile religious fanatics. That optimism that drove us 40 years ago is starting to disappear at an alarming rate. But then, as if willing to break the theme, we received another final report from our explorers, and this one was just as bizarre as they get, but for different reason than the previous ones. See, we were aware of existence of this race, the so-called Thrakus families, for some time now. We learned about them from some Drithans and Yuri, but what they told us seemed so odd and so improbable that we simply had to check it out ourselves, just to see if they weren't kidding. And when our ambassadors landed on the first Thrakus world, they saw something they never expected to see. Something that looked very similar to the view they witnessed every day while looking into the mirror. Airlock pressure is almost equalized, Ambassador. It would be a good time to stop being nervous. I'm not nervous, Davban, just excited and a bit curious. So far, only one of our merchant pilots operating in Sundrithan space encountered these aliens, but he described them in a way that simply can't be right. And how did he describe them? Good day to you, representatives of the Commonwealth. It is an honor to meet you. Elves. He described them as elves. And this is how our researchers managed to develop Aya's drive, which in turn allowed us to reach the stars. But I have to admit, your story, the cataclysm, the exodus, the strife, was a bit more interesting, Ambassador. A bit too long in places, but certainly worth telling on a pleasant evening with a glass of fine drink, to help one appreciate the accomplishments of your race. But enough talking about our past, my good guests, for with our meeting today, a new age of prosperity and culture will surely begin. You can only imagine how pleased we are to meet another refined, logical and cultured race among the sea of murderous fanatics and religious zealots. Likewise, Chief Executive, but to be honest, we were quite nervous when your fleet showed up to escort us in. They certainly make an impressive sight. Of course they do. With the neighbors like ours, one must learn to always look as menacing as possible to deter those who would impose their illogical mindset upon us at gunpoint. But enough about our miserable neighbors. This meeting is a joyous occasion, so let us talk about good things like your delicious assistant. I have to admit I was highly surprised, positively of course, when you brought him along. Oh, you mean Davban? Well, their presence and skills were truly a blessing during our journey. Thank you, Ambassador, but I'm just doing my job as best as I can, same as anyone else would in this situation. That's precisely what I meant, Ambassador. Truly a delicious specimen, that Kithri. I can see why your researchers uplifted them. And I must say, it is a joy to see another race that understands and appreciates the value that diverse alien species have for one's nation. A toast, then, to races from high and low working towards a single goal. Worry not, according to data provided by your science officer, our wine is compatible with your biology, same as our food. Then a toast it is, Chief Executive. My word, this truly is tasty. Only the best for a race so similar to ours, Ambassador. And since I mentioned the food, how did you find the first meal that was served earlier? Simply magnificent. I had no idea that fruit soup could leave such an exquisite aftertaste. If our races ever established trade deals, I am sure your dishes would sell like crazy back at home. When, Ambassador, when we establish trade deals, for I'm sure that you agree that reasonable races like ours should keep together in this vile galaxy. But we can continue this later. All that talk about food made me realize that it's time for the main course. Let me just call the servants. Servants, bring in the main dish. Servants. Oh dear, pardon this disgrace, Ambassador, but it seems my servants have took off somewhere, the rascals. There they are. I swear we have a visitor from another nation and you're running late. Inexcusable. Once you're done here, be so kind and report to the housemaster and tell him what happened. Good kids. Now, Ambassador, how do you like the main dish? It smells amazing. I'm sure it tastes just as... Yes, what is it, Davban? Pardon me, Ambassador, but we must excuse ourselves. It's time for our customary cultural observance. Customary what? A critical part of our daily routine, Ambassador. I have to insist that we leave immediately. It would take less than an hour, but if we won't go, the hierarch will be highly upset. Of course, where is my head, Davban? Truly, I should be your assistant, not the other way around. You will have to excuse us for a bit, Chief Executive. It truly is critical for us to get back to our ship. Of course, respect for one's culture is highly important after all. We'll keep your meal warm in the meantime, and I'll await your return so we could discuss our future plans of beautifying the galaxy. I look forward to see you and your friend very soon. Okay, Davban, what the hell was that? These guys are the first ones to act in a civilized manner, and you just threw a wrench into the middle of our negotiations. I had to do this, Ambassador. Per Professor Tanwa's order, as your assistant, I am always obliged to carry a bioscanner with me, and while our host was talking, I ran a scan on that meal he brought us. It had the same genetic composition as our host. The meat you had on your plate came from another Thrakus. What? No, it can't be. Are you sure? Yes, I scanned it for the second time while you were saying goodbyes. By the stars, I'm going to be sick. And the other meals? Safe, fortunately, but given the way our host acted, it seems that cannibalism is something completely normal in their society. And so is slavery, it seems. When he told his servants to go to that housemaster, they seemed terrified. Stars, what have we walked into? And... Oh no, Davban, you can't return there with me. For all this time when he was calling you delicious, I thought it was just a figure of speech, but... Alright, Focus, I have to get back there, but with another assistant. And you, Davban, you get to the comm room and send message back home. Tell them that all contacts with Thrakus families have to be approved by the government, especially if Kithri are involved. I fear that your people will soon become a very sought-after commodity around these parts. So, in an unexpected twist, we have encountered a race that looked very similar to us, but, like with the Alir, we have once again learned that it is unwise to judge a race based simply on the way it looks, because underneath their enticing looks and charismatic demeanor, these Thrakus hid some terrifying secrets. For one, they were hostile towards all alien races, who they considered to be animalistic and treated them like some sort of advanced animals. Their society was just as decadent as the Yanari one, and, just like our neighboring crocodiles, required masses of slaves to operate properly, since higher echelons of Thrakus society would never debase themselves with menial work. And finally, it turned out that they not only practiced slavery, they also, to the horror of our diplomatic delegation, eat their slaves, regardless of the race, even cannibalizing their own species. But, despite these being perfect reasons to cut all contacts with them, there was yet another surprise. Namely, the fact that despite their cannibalistic xenophobia, the Thrakus actually quite liked us. It seems that they consider us almost as perfect as they are, based on our looks, and consider us as some sort of a cross between younger siblings and missing evolutionary link that has to be gently encouraged along the proper path. And let's face it, with all the potential foes we encountered so far, we are not in position to turn them away. So, despite many reservations, we're going to establish diplomatic contacts with Thrakus families, but the government is going to monitor it very, very strictly, and we will most certainly not allow them to open up restaurants in our space. And to be honest, it is a good thing that we managed to secure this peace, because, as you can clearly see, it seems that Thrakus are one of the 3 most numerous races in the galaxy, the other 2 being Alir and the Dis. And especially that second race is very dangerous, since it means that the Dis Berserkers actually have the manpower to back their genocidal tendencies. Now, this list isn't exactly foolproof though. Basically, it's just a census ordered by leaders of the Commonwealth, in which our explorers, diplomats and scientists all pulled together their knowledge in order to make a list of every species that inhabited our space. But since we can't exactly confirm this data, it would be best to consider it more of an estimate than a real value. But what we can consider a complete data is the census of our own worlds, which can shed some light on all the species that currently inhabit the Commonwealth. As you can see, us humans are still the largest group, but ever since liberation of the Aramathi they took a second place, and considering that they do not suffer from slower growth rates like we do, it may be that in a few decades they will actually outnumber us. And also, something that happened in the background across the past few months, we faced yet another group of refugees, this time from the Grolferb Covenant, who were escaping the extermination at the hands of Dis Berserkers. And although the Covenant isn't exactly friendly towards us, we accepted those refugees anyway, and soon 2 billion Grolferb citizens settled on our outlying planet of Moros. We can only hope that they will behave as true citizens of the Commonwealth should. But, as you clearly have noticed, there is yet another entity out there, and we call it an entity, not a nation, because we simply have absolutely no information about them. All we know is their supposed name. the Eternal Empire, and some scraps of data provided to us by Raxicodium Union, who lost several of their walls to that odd nation. From what we've learned, this empire is, like their neighboring berserkers, focused solely on exterminating all life they come across, to the point that they don't even land on the planets they conquer, instead glassing them with months or even years of indiscriminate bombardment. However, unlike the berserkers, they don't even contact their victims. The Dis, at the very least, have some decency to tell us to our face that they consider us filth that has to be eradicated. But this empire simply showed up and began extermination, ignoring any and all forms of communication. Nobody knows what they want, nobody knows how they speak, nobody even knows how they look. The only relatively certifiable scrap of information comes from remnants of Raxicodium fleet, who managed to take out several Imperial vessels before they were ultimately defeated. According to those reports, their scanners picked up some biological data among the debris, which hints at Imperials being some sort of winged, semi-humanoid avians. But that's it. If they were a bit closer to us, we could probably use our superior sensors to monitor them, but since they're on the opposite end of the galaxy, which is actually very, very good news, we can't really do anything to uncover the secrets of these mysterious eradicators. We'll just have to hope that someone will be able to stop them, and, ironically, it seems that our best bet is to count on the Dis. The galaxy clearly had a sense of humor when it placed two genocidal races right next to each other. Soon we received some straight good news for a change, this time from our colony of Moros. It seems that our policy of settling Grolfurp refugees there paid off. Turns out one of those refugees was one Saklen So Padam, I hope I pronounce it right, a renowned scientist from the Covenant. In the months following her exile, she became one of the most prominent figures among her fellow refugees, and soon among the rest of the population. And soon she became a face of the entire colony and began, to the surprise of our officials, an extended campaign for education, claiming that her people spent too long under religiously imposed ignorance of their covenant, and that such approach clearly didn't work, as they were unable to defend themselves. And, because the rest of the refugees that came with Saklan were not as radical as the rest of their race, they quickly supported her campaign, and began a slow process of turning Moros into a center of education. So, overall this initiative, while unexpected, turned out to be very beneficial for us. Let's hope that all our other refugees will prove to be just as useful. For now though, we'll have to return to our rebuilding efforts, and focus our attention on replenishing losses our fleet took during its battle above New Sajar. And we actually have some new ship models that we can construct, namely two models of battle cruisers, Horus and Osiris. Though, mind you, Horus is actually still in experimental phase, and until we upgrade our spaceport, since we need some pretty specialized construction facilities, we won't really be able to build it. Still though, both models are worth mentioning since they were designed along two distinct routes. The Horus class, designed by our Navy engineers, is larger and better armored in order to survive anything our enemies could throw at it. On the other hand, the Osiris was designed by Kurosawa Spaceways Incorporated, our very first private company that secured military contract. And they approached it a bit differently, focusing more on firepower and speed, in hopes that increased evasion capabilities will make up for a smaller number of defensive systems. Also, the Osiris is actually more compact than Horus. While Horus-class battlecruiser is almost 1.5 km long and require almost 2,000 people to operate, Osiris is only 900 meters long and needs crew of just 1,300. However, because of this smaller size, it has to be made with more expensive materials, which makes it a bit more costly than the Horus. Still though, since we can actually only build Osiris-class battlecruisers right now, since the other model is too large, we don't really have an option. But there is also another class of ship that we can now build, the freshly designed Mithril-class support cruiser, the largest ship we can deploy at this time, being almost 2.5 kilometers long and crewed by nearly 5,000 engineers. But the role of this ship is not combat. Instead, it is a massive floating factory combined with a dockyard that houses several dozen of small support repair craft that can fix the rest of our ships in our fleet. And because these repair shuttles are small and maneuverable, they can even repair our vessels during battle, greatly increasing staying power of our navy. Plus, of course, they will be extremely important during longer campaigns, ensuring that our fleet will always have a place to fix itself. And the best part? Because this ship is modular by design, we can construct it right now despite it being much larger than the Horus battlecruiser. And finally, you might have noticed back there that almost all of our combat ships have been reinforced with auxiliary crews of droids that will help our men in any and all of their tasks, from repairs and target acquisition to regular maintenance, which will greatly increase the efficiency of all our vessels. Who knows, maybe one day we'll be able to turn the entirety of our fleet to the AI to prevent the loss of life in combat. And while our fleet is slowly being rebuilt and upgraded, the rest of our nation continues its expansion, and this time we have a very particular goal in mind, a planet called Uldo 3. As you may remember, we have sent the rogue Bilyuan drone on an exploration mission to give it a chance to prove itself, and it did just that by finding something truly remarkable, an entire city of some precursor alien race. Even better, the city was apparently so well preserved that most of its facilities were operational and just had to be provided with power to return them to full functionality. Unfortunately, although the city was well preserved, it contained no clues about its previous inhabitants, not even a single microscopic bit of biological material that could help us identify its builders. But, mysterious as it was, this city was still a perfect starting point for a future colony, and this time we once again had to use another species to settle this world, since, like Arvo, Uldo 3 is a desert planet, which makes it too inhospitable for any major human population. So, since we already had one colony established by the Kithri, this time it was a chance for the Aramathi to act as our pioneers. And so, in early 2242, a colony ship took off from New Sajar, carrying thousands of new colonists. Their plan is to use that abandoned city as a base of operations in future capital, but it still doesn't mean their job will be an easy one, because, as it happens, some areas of the planet are covered in highly toxic gases, perhaps the reason why the city was abandoned in the first place. Fortunately, with our shielding technology we should be able to ensure that these vapors pose no threat to our colonists, but we will still have to deal with that situation so we could fully settle the planet. And that is the second reason why Aramathi were chosen for this job, because they are naturally good at planetary landscaping, so we can use their skills to ensure that Uldo 3 is brought to heel swiftly and efficiently. But while things are looking good for us, the same cannot be said about our allies. In the north, the war between Ahadi-Jir Federation and the Shizria Isolationist turned into a stalemate, with neither side being able to push forward. And to our west, our Alir and Sundrithan friends proved that, while their fleets may be impressive, their peaceful races aren't exactly too good when it comes to actual military campaigns. And that lack of experience caused one of the Alir fleets to be caught alone by the Yanari, and as you can clearly see, our first allies are clearly outmatched in this combat. And although we can't do anything to help them in this case, we can at the very least learn from their mistake. And the most important knowledge that we can gain from this battle is data about Yanari military tactics. While the Alir ships are equipped mostly with kinetic weapons, the Yanari vessels are covered from top to bottom in missile launchers, which makes them far more powerful. And while Alir ships are using kinetic guns, none of them are actually point defense weapons, which means that our friends have no means of countering swarms of enemy missiles as they tear through space and turn Alir ships into dust. Still, our allies fight on bravely, desperately trying to hold on despite clearly fighting a losing battle. But against such overwhelming odds they can't really do anything, and one by one their ships are destroyed until, finally, the battered remnants decide that discretion is better part of valor, open the emergency wormhole and run away, leaving Yanari to pick through debris. So, the first victory of this war went to xenophobic slavers, but fortunately it is not the end, since both Sundrithans and Alir still have additional fleets. Hopefully they will coordinate them better next time. And as for us, it means that if we ever get into conflict with the Yanari, it would be wise to refit our ships with as many point defense guns as possible, and maybe even create an entire support armada of small PD corvettes. Yanari missiles might be powerful, but it won't matter if they're unable to reach their targets. But although all these wars around us remained beyond our borders, we keep feeling the effects they have on galactic population, as once more our sensors picked a convoy of battered Yadran civilian vessels, this time heading for Arvo. Like last time, we sent a group of officials to clear these refugees through, but when our people boarded the first vessel, they found something highly disturbing. Instead of Yadrans, the ships were filled with yet another unknown race, some form of otter-like mammals that were hideously mutated and overgrown grown with something that looked like sentient fungus. Terrified, our officials quarantined the entire convoy, expecting disease or even Billy-1 biological weapon, but as it turned out, these aliens, grotesque as they were, meant us no harm, and were merely trying to escape Billy-1 swarms. And while our men were questioning them, they learned that Kingdom of Yadra had a little secret. It seems that Yadrans have evolved on their homeworld along another sentient species, these Yuvanuks, who are actually two species, living in a symbiotic relationship. The otter-like mammal is the muscle, while the fungus is the brain, although as it happens this brain is not exactly as advanced as human and Yadran one. Regardless, these Yuvanuks lived alongside Yadrans since their ancient times and were used as a sort of peasant caste, dealing with most menial jobs like farming or mining. And because of their docile nature, their less developed mental faculties and centuries of conditioning, they were actually content in their role of lowest caste, taking pride in knowing that it is their work that keeps Yadran society afloat. But now, with their homeworld lost, Yuvanuk's self-preservation instinct took over, and they organized themselves into this 1 billion group that managed to flee Yadran space. So, it is an interesting revelation to process, and while we're doing that, these refugees were allowed to settle on Arvo, where they actually will be very useful, since they're good at industrial jobs. But aside from their skills, they brought something else with them. Tales about the fate of Yadran homeworld. By now, roughly 1/3 of planet's population, about 8 billion people, fell victim to Billy-1 swarms, either devoured on the spot or abducted into Billy-1 core territory, where they will no doubt feed the ever-hungry hives. Those tales made us realize that perhaps it is time for humanity to take a stand in this matter. It was time for both leaders and citizens of the Commonwealth to make a choice. And soon the Billy-1 mind itself gave us an incentive to make that choice, as in July 2233, Jir ambassador on Ortus informed us that the mind sent them and their Ahadi comrades a message. Just 2 words: "We feast." But mere days later, both Jir and Ahadi sensors picked up dozens of Billy-1 transport ships, carrying millions of their mindless warriors as a vanguard of their invasion, and that information tipped the scales. Now, as you might have heard before, there is a certain opportunistic fraction in our military that wants us to bank on weakness of defeated Yadrans and attack them in order to, officially at least, protect them from the Billy-1 mind, since their king is clearly unable to do so. And that militaristic group spent last 2 years running a public campaign, in which they tried to convince our population to go to war once more. But now, with yet another Billy-1 attack, the campaign has been, effectively, hijacked by the Innovation Party, and Chancellor Tessar and Prime Minister Ishii used it to promote a new goal. We still will go to Yadran space, and we still will protect them, but not by kicking them while they're weak, but by actually freeing them from Mind's presence. So, once again our government played a card of liberation war, and, as more and more news about Billy-1 atrocities arrived from the north, our people approved this plan, and soon preparations began across the entire nation. We probably won't be able to save all Yadrans, since Mind already exterminated many of them, but even if we liberate a few billion, it will still be a success. And so the gears of Commonwealth industry once more began to turn for war. Over the next year, armies were reinforced with new weapons and more droids, in hopes to prevent such extensive losses as we took on New Sajar. Border system of Myrinius was fortified with additional defensive platforms, and all the time our shipyards kept building more and more ships to bring our fleet to necessary standards. But once again, the most important advantage came from the failure of other nation, this time the Ahadi conglomerate, whose fleet has been caught by Billy-1 swarm and forced into an unfavorable engagement in Zandeban system. There, 33 Ahadi vessels were attacked by 55 Billy-1 ships and clashed in a fierce battle where both sides used exactly the same weapon, coil guns, similar to models we use on our ships. The battle was as chaotic as you might expect, and it was clear that, unlike the Alir, capitalists of Ahadi Mega Corporation know what they're doing when it comes to space combat. Unfortunately, aside from their numerical superiority, Billy-1s also had another advantage: their absolute lack of concern for the lives of their own drones. While Ahadis tried to fight conservatively in order to minimize their losses, the swarm simply threw all its ships forward in a mad, nearly suicidal attack. and after just a few minutes it became obvious that with such advantage in terms of firepower, the Billy ones would win this fight, and soon Ahadi commander ordered his fleet to retreat. The corporation lost roughly half of its strength in this battle, while barely even making a dent in the swarm. But still, the data they gathered proved to be critical to our plans. Not data about weapons or tactics, mind you, but data about Billy One engines. Like Zrakan Union, the Mind is using warp drives, which have limited range, and that means that while we can reach both occupied Yadron systems, the Mind won't be able to do so. If they want to strike back at us, they will have to go through heavily fortified Nigel system, where our defensive platforms could delay or even destroy their fleet. And that information sealed the deal. It was time for another liberation war. And soon we were ready. Well as ready one can be for a war against a mysterious, incomprehensible hive mind. With our armies gathering on Ortus to train before another planetary invasion, Task Force Mantico has been sent ahead and rallied at Merinnius, from where they can jump right into the system where Yadron occupied homeworld is. Now, our fleet may be weaker than Billy One Combat Swarm, but if everything will go according to plan, we won't even have to face them, since they are still busy fighting against Jir and recovering Ahadi to the north. From her new command post aboard the new battlecruiser, CSV Osiris, Admiral Lin relayed her final orders and sent an all-clear to the government. And since Billy One Mind never wasted words, our officials decided to do the same. There was no overlong declaration of war filled with accusations and condemnations. The Swarm used just 2 words to declare their attacks, and we did the same. Expect us, our message said, and on 12th of January 2245 it was sent towards our soon-to-be enemies. Once more humanity goes to war then, for reasons that, at least to outside observer, may even seem noble. But was this war actually good decision? Will our forces be victorious, or will they too fall to the overwhelming power of the ravenous Billy One hordes? And how our neighbors will react to our sudden involvement into yet another conflict? We will learn that in the next episode of Second Chance. Another failure. Again. Told you already, you crazy bitch. I can't do it. Nobody can do it, and even if someone can, it would certainly be easier if you hadn't skullfucked me, or her, with all those fucking probes. These monitoring devices are necessary to keep track on everything that's happening in your bodies, Private Jaeger. When we get a positive result, we want every single bit of data to be recorded, and besides, don't give me your angry face. You know full well how it is. You get us good results, the powers that be will erase a few years from your sentence. But if you'll keep up with your sass, then we're going to have to meet here in this lab every day for the next 30 years. And quite frankly, you're a bit too rude to be a permanent associate, so shut up and try again. Sorry about that, Mr. Sinan. Continue. Oh well. To be honest, I expected something else from this operation. You know, test subjects that are a bit more willing than this fellow down there. Truth be told, Mr. Sinan, people don't really seem eager to volunteer for unsure experiments in which their minds are being invaded by someone else, so we have to work with what we have. Plus, these guys down there are still getting better treatment than they should, all things considered. Private Jaeger over there is a deserter who caused the death of his entire platoon on New Sajar, and the woman is a Kithri eater from Curaçao. Normally, they would both be sent to some asteroid mining base and used in the most dangerous tasks for the few decades, but instead we give them food, comfortable rooms, and a chance to make up for their misbehavior by serving on the forefront of psionic research. I see. So I suppose this makes you a good guy in this situation. I really wish people would stop thinking in such categories. Good guy in comparison to what? Billy One, Zrakan, Yanari? These psionic powers manifested themselves in our people for around 2 decades now, but we still have no real idea what causes them, and with entire galaxy going to hell right now, we can't really afford having something so incomprehensible sitting right in the middle of our society. But I agree, Professor Tanwa, just wanted to see if you're not self-delusional about the whole affair. So, before that rather rude interruption, you were going to tell me exactly what it is you were working at. Ah, yes. Well, as I mentioned, we don't really know what causes these psionic powers to manifest themselves. The only thing we know for sure is that they originate from subject's brain. We even managed to pinpoint their exact location. But while we have the end result, like for example telekinesis, we don't even have the most basic understanding of the beginning of the psionic process. Because of that, we gathered a number of both psionically active and regular subjects, and we've been trying to link them together in the same way some of our soldiers on New Sajar linked with their comrades in situations of severe stress. If a psionic could use that link to use their powers through a non-psionic subject, or even manipulate them to some extent, we could monitor the entire process in a non-psionic brain. We hope that by creating such a situation, the non-psionic subject could unlock its potential, and that, in turn, would give us more insight into the entire process. It could even help us understand how linked consciousnesses, like the one observed in Billion Mind, operate. So, a bit more theoretical approach than Mr. Lashinov's work, as I see. If I may ask, why don't you cooperate with him? After all, his department is responsible for psionics. True, but Lachinov has a wrong approach to this entire business. He thinks, no wonder, like an engineer. He believes that psionics are a puzzle and he tries to put it together into something that seems usable, which greatly limits the potential of his research. He doesn't try to figure out what else we could do with these powers, he merely takes what we already have and builds from it. And while he's right about this being a puzzle, the truth is we don't have all the pieces to put it together. Stars, we don't even know how many pieces are there or if we're even able to perceive them all. And that's what my department is trying to figure out. Which is why I approached you, Professor Tanwa. You trying to push the limits and sign on financial solutions will gladly fund your research efforts in this matter, in hopes that your work will benefit the entire Commonwealth. Consider financial matters of this department taken care of. And now, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look at your other project. You know, the one that doesn't exist. Of course, but I do hope you have a few hours. It's pretty far away from the city, as you might expect. Mr. Raskolnikov, take over here, and please call for a MAC train to the cloning facility.